We've got like a backup recording. Let's see here. We'll get this. Speak. Speak and be heard, Bill.
Check, check, check.
Perfect. Okay, so with this, we are rolling. We've got our backup recording. We are live. We've got viewers. Bill, the unthinkable happened. Well, let's kind of. That's almost good. Like I'm gonna use it again. All right, so what's going on? And welcome to Barely a Podcast, where Bill Zimmerman and I are reacting as quickly as we could to some true breaking news. Because, Bill, you and I are in a group chat on Twitter. We were literally asking each other earlier today, hey, has anybody heard anything regarding like trade information? And then, boom. Roquan Smith is a Baltimore Raven. The Bears pick up not just a second-round pick, not just A.J. Klein, but the higher of the Ravens' 2 fifth-round picks. It's within the negotiation. Bill, what is your initial thoughts to number 58 no longer in a Chicago Bears uniform?
Well, my initial thought first was shock. It was genuine shock, like, kind of that mouth agape shock. I did not think that Roquan Smith was going to get traded. I wasn't sure exactly how Ryan Poles was going to handle the next off season. I assumed he was going to receive a tag. EJ Snyder and I had talked about a couple weeks ago on my podcast that maybe he's not going to get a tag with his inconsistent play this year, but he's been up and down, but genuinely shocked that Ryan Poles did this. But we talk about it all the time that if you are a Ryan Pace player on a Ryan Poles football team, and I understand Justin Fields and I know how good Tevin Jenkins has been lately, but you just, that just shows that anyone, if you are not a Ryan Poles guy, it's possible you could get traded. I like the return. I was pleased that this actually happened. And I can get into the details, obviously, as we move forward here in this little quick podcast. But shock was the first reaction, but then once all the details came out, I was pleased with Ryan Poles' decision.
Absolutely. I mean, look, I don't want to make it sound like okay, so Bill, I am worried about the optics of what I am about to say because it's going to sound, if you've never heard me before, like either I just hate linebackers or suddenly because Roquan Smith's not a Chicago Bear that I've turned coat. But Bill, I mean, his play this season, to say he didn't fit the Matt Eberflus 4-3 is an understatement. I mean, it's a very run heavy role. And I know we'd identified before the season that, at least in my opinion, I didn't think Roquan meshed with this system well, but I can't tell, or I'm going off feel here as much as I am all 22 analysis. It feels like Roquan has left more plays on the field than he's actually made this season. And that's obviously not what you want to see for a linebacker that is truly asking the moon. I mean, Bill, we don't know what's going on behind the doors of NFL, like front offices all over the place. But I think you'd agree that with Bobby Wagner having blown the market open only a couple years ago, Fred Warner further pushing the ceiling, linebackers have to be approaching a peak in terms of just total contract value, right? I mean, nobody's saying that Roquan Smith right now is somehow the last super deal on the, or like within football, but a linebacker right now, it's just a hard value to peg. So like you're saying, I mean, I think there's a huge win that the Bears got them or got Roquan off their future books regardless because of how poor I would say his scheme fit was. But then, I mean, for crying out loud, Bill, the Twitter notification comes up. Roquan Smith's going to who? The Ravens. Very smart franchise. I don't know what your first thought was. I thought, oh gosh, did they get a third? But to hear a second and a fifth and a warm body coming back, you know what? I am stunned that Ryan Poles was able to command that kind of value for a player playing as poorly as he was. That, not to mention, Bill, I mean, there are so many agents that you've got to think were able to just sit back and leave Roquan in Poles' hands and say, what are you going to do? Keep him? So I'm very, very surprised at the return. I think that it really works out for the Bears. I mean, to put this in perspective, Bill, Roquan Smith just became a $20 million free agent, a second-round pick, prestigious pick at linebacker to replace him, and another role player. That's a lot of value for a guy that wasn't really bringing much to your defense right now anyways.
Yeah, and look, you brought up his play, and I think what you said about his play was fair. I mean, yes, has Roquan had a couple great games? Sure, he has had a
Yes.
couple very good games, but he has had some duds. And I was hoping that maybe he had gotten more comfortable in the system and we were going to keep seeing better play, but he took another step back against Dallas. And I don't know if that played into it or not, where Poles was finally like, no, he's not going to be a fit in this system. But you talk about his play. Well, let me talk about the contract. And I've been pretty consistent about what I've been saying since Roquan held out over the summer. And that is that I think 100% Roquan Smith should be asking for 5 years, 100 million, 55 million guaranteed.
Easily.
Because that is what Leonard and Warner, that's kind of the progression there. And it doesn't matter if he's not better than Leonard or Warner. Kyler Murray was not the best quarterback in the NFL when he became the highest paid quarterback in the NFL. It's just how these progressions work in salaries. So that's what Roquan should be asking for. But 100%, if I'm Ryan Poles, I would not want to be paying an off-ball linebacker who, as you brought up, inconsistent play. I would not want to give him that kind of cabbage. So when I looked at this, I had no problem with Roquan Smith holding out and everything he did, but I had no problem with Ryan Poles kind of sticking his heels in and going, you're not going to get that contract here. Let's play this out and see how you fit in this defense and how you play this year. And I think the decision was he knew he wasn't going to be paying him that kind of money. So let's get some value and not deal with the tag and everything else in this offseason. And another thing, and I think off-ball linebackers are the offensive equivalent or the defensive equivalent of running backs on offense. They are useful players, they are important players, but they are replaceable players unless you get an extra special talent. And I don't think Roquan is very good, but I don't think he was that extra special talent. And those type of linebackers, Robert, they do not last long. No. I mean, the type of guys that we've seen kind of get contracts or fall apart. I mean, Deion Jones, Zach Cunningham, Jalen Smith, Anthony Barr, Miles Jack, Jamie Collins a few years ago. And look, as good as Shaq Leonard is, he hasn't gotten on the field this year. So right. The amount of issues you have in paying a linebacker and getting value out of that second contract, it's very difficult to do. And I was talking to Brad Spielberger from PFF. Name me a high-paid, not an edge. Name me a high-paid linebacker that was on a defense that reached the Super Bowl. Because I can't think of one. I'm not saying there's not one out there, but I can't think of one.
Oh, yeah. I mean, Bill, you're preaching to the choir here. Look, anybody who has listened to my streams before has literally heard me say this. And so I'm going to borrow my own words just so that it's clear I'm not turning my coat, so to speak, on a very, very good player. Roquan Smith plays like you're talking about that off-ball linebacker position. And what was the best season that he had in his life, Bill? If you saw the same tape that I did, so to speak, it's probably 2018, where he looked stellar. Well, why was that? He had Akeem Hicks in front of him and Eddie Goldman soaking 4 to 5 run gaps. Those two were incredible. Khalil Mack and Leonard Floyd also pinching the edge so that Roquan could truly just play side to side without any threat of anybody blocking him. And if an offensive player did leak through, who took on the block? But Danny Trevathan, who wasn't a run thumper, so to speak, Bill, but he went outside of his normal game to protect Roquan even further. So when they played teams with spicy running backs like Todd Gurley and the Rams, Roquan could be the difference in that game. But if we were baking a cake, Bill, is Roquan Smith the icing or the cake? Because if it's me just trying to call it out, I don't think that a player that needs that much protection can be part of your fundamental defense, right? And I feel like when you're going through team building, you have to pay for cake and you have to draft your icing. And it's great that Roquan served the Bears as much as he did. He really was a key piece to that Ryan Pace defense that was legendary, and his name ought to be remembered that way because he was a huge piece of a legendary defense. But like you're saying, at this stage in his career, he's a locker room leader for a bygone regime. Khalil Mack got traded somewhat ruthlessly. Robert Quinn got traded and evoked tears from Roquan Smith just last week. I'm not about to say that the writing was on the wall. I am about to say that I think that this makes so much sense. And seriously, a second-round pick and what might as well be $20 million in cap savings, this feels like a Bears win for me. At the very least, it's a mutual win all around.
Yeah, I agree. And look, the only thing that's giving me pause is the fact that the Baltimore Ravens rarely make mistakes. And if the Baltimore Ravens are giving up a second round pick for Roquan Smith, they absolutely have plans to pay him next year. They are not going to rent him and let him go for a second and a fifth and AJ Klein. But the Ravens don't make mistakes. So that gives me a little pause that maybe I'm not looking at this right. But like you talked about, the fit and the play. And I think, if Ryan, look, this is Ryan Poles' show. And, whether you like Ryan Poles or dislike Ryan Poles, it's his show. He's got the keys to the castle. He's going to be making the decisions. And if his decision was that Roquan Smith was not going to fit into the long-term plans, then yeah, get what value you can get for him. And getting this much value, it has me pleased. I mean, that's 2 second-round picks. They've got a first-round pick again next year, 2 second-round picks. Now they've got 2 fifth-round picks. They got the 4th-round pick now, 2 4s for Roberts. With the Robert Smith.
I'm Robert Smith.
Quinn.
Nice to meet you.
There we go. But, he's really starting to get some draft capital. I think if he makes no more moves, that's going to be 20 draft picks his first 2 drafts. I mean,
which would be great.
That's what you talk about. That's what you want from a GM, is a guy who's going to stockpile picks, get depth, and find some stars and some talent along the way. So I agree with you. I think the writing was on the wall. I think we've been kind of trending to this. I didn't think we'd get here.
I didn't either.
But sure enough, here we are, and we move forward. And I think, is it going to hurt this year potentially with the defense? I know Roquan, has been up and down, but, there's going to be a hole in that defense that, we'll see who's going to fill that role. I assume they're going to give Jack Sanborn a chance. That'll be fun and exciting, I think, for Bears fans to see what he can do. And, AJ Klein, I'm not really expecting anything out of AJ Klein. I think that is just a warm body that they need in their linebacking core. They don't have a lot of veterans. They don't have a lot of depth there right now. I think that's all it is. Look, he was a solid player a few years ago in New Orleans. He's not going to knock your socks off. I don't really know what he's been up to the last couple of years. I'm not going to lie. I did check, and he was in Buffalo before this and not doing much. So obviously this is a guy in his early 30s that is kind of fading. So again, that's just more of a warm body to keep in the mix there. But I am really pleased with this. Again, it's tough because look, Roquan was a face of the defense for the last few years. But I think it's the right move from Ryan.
But not this year. And I mean, there's a trade that
Eddie Jackson's got the face of the defense again.
And that's a trade we are going to have to talk about on this. Yeah, sure, short, quote unquote. But like that, this is the trade deadline special officially, Bill. And
sure.
Like we're right in the thick of it. I mean, the crazy part about this is, so you mentioned that there's going to be a hole on the defense. This is the rare year, Bill, where I'm going to put my nerd hat on and say that's almost okay, if not an asset. I mean, Roquan Smith, more than likely, gives you 5 more positions within the draft just because the Bears probably dropped the 2 Lions games on account of this, or at least drop one of them. I mean, that's a team that is running the ball like superheroes, and you just took away one of your faster linebackers. It's going to be that much tougher to track down DeAndre Swift without Roquan Smith, and if they lose to the Lions, they go from, potentially as high as 8-8 or 8-9, maybe even 9-8 if just everything falls their way, down into like the 5-12, 6-11 cloud. And hey, Bill, if they did that, I mean, this might be the year for it. Now, the question becomes, is the locker room on board with this? Because as much as nerds, hello, that's me, would talk about what you could do to maximize your resources, Bill, Justin Fields, like, is he in on the plan? Not did somebody let him know that this was coming, not did he have inside information, but does he feel sold out because his defense just got worse? Obviously, Bill, it would be pretty exhausting to play every single game like the Cowboys game just was, where if you don't score 49 points, then you're you're run out of the building. But there does have to be some kind of balance here. That said, I mean, Brad Spielberger, Jason from Over the Cap, Dan Weirderer and Adam Johns have all now dropped hints about the Bears potentially adding some kind of offensive veteran. So I I have no idea what the Bears are doing right now. We are in the middle of wheel and deal mode. And while we're on the topic, I'll ask you this. Are you trading Eddie Jackson if you got to choose? And if you are, what price is your minimum where somebody has to make a blank offer to get off your couch?
Yeah, and I actually jumped in the mentions on Jeff Hughes, the Bears blog, because he was talking about, is Eddie Jackson next? And he said, you got to try and get a first round pick for him. Now, he's not 29, but he will be 29 in about a month. A 29-year-old safety who makes about $14 million a year, and I know he's playing really well. I do not think you can get a first round pick for Eddie Jackson. I think you could get a third round pick for Eddie Jackson pretty easily, but I don't know if I want to move Eddie Jackson for a third round pick because, we talked about it. I think when we did a podcast together over the summer, kind of the training camp preview, that Eddie Jackson was playing for his job, right? He was playing for Ryan Poles to say, yes, he's worth the money to stay on this roster. Well, Eddie Jackson has proven that in this system, he should stay on this roster. So if I'm not getting a second round pick, I'm not even considering trading Eddie Jackson right now. And I don't know if there's a team out there that would give it to for a 29-year-old safety. But I think at this point, like Roquan Smith, because of his inconsistent play and because of where he was at linebacker, you can kind of sit there and be like, I don't know if that's going to decimate the defense as important as he was. If you pull Eddie Jackson off the secondary,
it might be the worst defense in the league, if not outright.
You're losing a big guy back there that quarterbacks and offensive coordinators are paying attention to. And you just have Jalen. I know you got a couple rookies who are playing well. You are really creating if you trade your three best defensive players, which is, all 3 out of 4 with Jalen Johnson. And that's in essence with what Quinn, Roquan, and Eddie Jackson would be. You trade away 3 out of those 4. You're going from a defense that's played pretty well in that average and probably above average range, especially in the second half. You are making them an atrocious unit. And, and again, this is something they're trying to build on for the future. It just doesn't make a lot of sense for me to trade Eddie Jackson unless a team calls up. Like I said, if Jeff Hughes brought up the Buffalo Bills. If the Buffalo Bills called up and said, we're going to give you our first round pick for Eddie Jackson, I'll pack Eddie's bags for him. Like that's a no-brainer. I don't care if it's the 32nd pick of the first round. It's a no-brainer. It has to happen. Now, I don't think that has any chance to happen. So, if someone calls up, it was going to be a contending team. So you're talking about the back 10 picks of the third round. I don't know if I'm ready to decimate the defense over that.
Right. I mean, look, Bill, I'm the wrong person to be on the podcast here because Eddie Jackson, I think, is the standout best player on the Bears defense and has been for now 2 years. But especially this year, I will take it even further, Bill. When you're watching the All-22, I mean, just think about it this way because you've seen it all over the place. How many times has a running back broken straight through the line of scrimmage, absolutely uninhibited? 58, nowhere to be seen. 53, not in the picture. Defensive linemen, they're nowhere. And suddenly, bang, he goes down 12 yards past the line of scrimmage, and Eddie Jackson's the one who made the tackle. Eddie Jackson has been so underrated in how well he's attacked the run specifically because he's effectively had to play goalie for a defense that's giving up major chances for the offensive running back. Players like Saquon Barkley, who got cut down 5 times, no less, by Eddie Jackson. I mean, let's put it this way, Bill. I could finish that sentence, but I could also just tell you that last time I checked, Eddie Jackson was second on this defense in tackles as a free safety. This isn't the first time. We said the same thing in 2020. Eddie Jackson is really good within this defense, especially this defense. And I even think that he's playing at what would be considered a defensive player of the year caliber if the Bears were good enough to generate that kind of notoriety. He has, off the top of my head, 4 interceptions, collected another one against Dallas in 8 games, as well as all these tackles that are game-saving plays. Eddie Jackson's a phenomenal player, and because of that, Bill, I'm actually wondering, can you trade him? I understand he's 29. The move makes all the sense in the world. Truly, it does. Like, trading a 29-year-old safety at the start of a brand new rookie window makes all the sense in the world, but he's playing almost too well. He's so valuable, and he's not playing inside linebacker. This is a position that theoretically is more about what happens before contact than after contact. In theory, a heady free safety could have a relatively long career for a position that normally stops around 34 years old. So I will respect Poles' decision either way. He's one of my favorite players, so there's a little too much emotion for me, but I'll also understand if they keep him because, as I'm sure you've seen, Bill, Jaquan Brisker last game against Washington and even this game against Dallas, sometimes everybody kind of looked bad against Dallas. But so last game against New England, it wasn't Washington. Brisker looked like a revelation. I mean, clearly Eddie Jackson is rubbing off on these young DBs. So can you replace him with a Jordan Battle type in the safety? Well, you could try, but as I'm sure you know, you're one ACL tear away from any draft gamble just patently not working. Then again, I say that as Tevin Jenkins has overcome back surgery to put together a pretty solid pro career so far. I mean, 2 years in, but it's the Jackson trade in particular is one that gets my blood boiling just because he's playing so well. I hate to let him, or I struggle to see the Bears getting better because he leaves the team, but eventually, be it age or injury or a trade, he's going to. So I'd understand the move. I think the more interesting trade I have in mind is honestly David Montgomery. And if they wanted to go even crazier, Bill, if they're talking to Darnell Mooney's agent and they just can't agree, maybe there's something there, but I doubt it. To be clear, we're talking fire sale. We're talking Roquan Smith just got traded. We're talking how deep does this rabbit hole go? Darnell Mooney's got to be one of those like last stops. You know what I mean? Like, I don't know. Who do you think is safe? Start there, Bill.
And look, and you just said a lot. There's a lot to unpack that I'll try and go through as much as I can, just to kind of wrap on the Eddie Jackson portion of the conversation. Look, the secondary is a unit, right? It is a cohesive unit. 2018, that secondary was unstoppable. 2019, not quite, still very good, but not quite as good. Why? Bryce Callahan, Adrian Amos gone, replaced with Clinton Dix and Buster Screen. It wasn't quite as good. And then you kept seeing pieces of the secondary disappear, and Eddie Jackson disappeared. Now, does that mean Eddie Jackson became a bad player? No. It meant offenses had no reason to throw the ball near Eddie Jackson. So now we're seeing an improved secondary. Eddie Jackson gets to do a lot more of the things that he's good at. Flus and Williams doing a good job at putting him in a position to do that. And we're seeing what can happen with Eddie Jackson. So looking at that, I understand and I agree with everything. You can only trade him if you are getting a big price. Now, on the offensive side of the ball, here's where I'd be surprised if they make moves. Really, is you've already stacked the deck against Justin Fields. We've talked about it. You and I have talked about it. Everyone's tweeted about it. I mean, we know how poor this offense is talent-wise. And I get that David Montgomery probably is not fitting into this team's future plans. Now, there are a lot of running backs available free agency next year, especially in that David Montgomery range. So is he going to have a big market? He may not. And can you bring him back next year on like a 2-year, $12, $14 million deal kind of thing? We're only paying him $6, $7 million a year. I think that's possible because I don't know how many teams are going to be sitting there wanting to pay David Montgomery $10, $12 million a year. Now, it'll be interesting to see because they're absolutely going to let him test the market if they don't trade him. But here's the thing. For this offense to work at all, they need to run the ball 30 to 40 times a game. Khalil Herbert is a great runner. We love what we're seeing him in this system that Getsy's put together. He is excelling. But he is a detriment in the pass game where David Montgomery isn't. And if you're talking about 30, 40 carries a game and you're giving Herbert 15 and you're giving Fields 10, you've still got to come up with another 10 to 15 carries, which means Ebner becomes your other guy. And he has not looked the part on offense when he has had opportunities. Maybe he will next year or the year after, who knows? But he's not there right now. So I think trading David Montgomery is really going to hurt what Luke Getsy wants to do offensively. So I'm not sure if that's going to happen. Does it make a lot of sense? It absolutely makes a lot of sense. And here's kind of what I'll say if you're Ryan Poles. It's the Ted DiBiase line. If you're an old school wrestling fan, everybody's got a price for the $1 million man. So if Ryan Poles is sitting
Yes.
there, I'm not trading Eddie Jackson, but the Buffalo Bills offer a 1, see you later, Eddie Jackson. I'm not trading Darnell Mooney if I'm Ryan Poles, but if the right offer comes along, see you later, Darnell Mooney. He's clearly made it clear that if he gets the draft capital and what he's looking for, he is going to move these players. Not Ryan Poles' players, but Ryan Pace's players. So when you look at that, I don't think he is going to make trades that are going to significantly hurt this offense. You know, Cody Whitehair, especially with Ryan Poles just wanting to eat money everywhere to try and trade people away. If Cody Whitehair was healthy, that's a guy I could see them trying to trade. You got Schofield and, Leatherwood's in the mix now, and Patrick and Mustafa. Like, I could see him saying we can lose Cody and still have not as, it won't hurt our offensive line that much. But Cole Kmet, maybe, but again, I don't know if that's something they're going to be looking. I'm just not sure. And I know that they're thinking, like you talked about, some of these guys hinting at it. In fact, pull up the curtain. Adam Johns was supposed to be recording with me tomorrow for my podcast, but he punted to next week because he was too concerned that he was going to be tied down for 25 minutes when he needed to be pushing out articles on The Athletic. So the Bears beat thinks things are going to go down. I'm just not sure who those guys are. Montgomery makes sense. And, a lot of these guys, Eddie Jackson could make sense and Mooney could make sense if the price is right. But I just don't know if those prices are going to be found. Now, he found a great price for Roquan, so I guess it's certainly possible. But I am just, this year is about developing Justin Fields for me. I can't say it enough. And the offense is finally humming. We're finally seeing things come together, and to do things that may significantly hurt his progress, that would concern me.
I completely understand. I mean, if anything, Bill, I actually think we're not paying enough lip service. Not you and me, but just the Bears' general vibe right now, paying enough lip service to how, look, I get it. Ryan Poles wants to rebuild. No GM wants to get rid of pieces that are actually useful. There is no sense ripping off a left bicep if you can't replace it with a better bicep. Right, Bill? I mean, look at Cody Whitehair. Cody Whitehair, you have to really dislike him if you're going to get rid of him based on the way his contract is structured, because you're still eating dead money next year. You're just eating less. You're getting some money back that you could replace him at left guard with. You know what, Bill? The money's already accounted for. The Bears have millions of dollars in cap space, and none of that has said asterisk, assuming a Cody Whitehair cut. Cody may stick around because he had a really solid first 5 games of the season this year. Like, it's possible that whether it's Eddie Jackson or Cody Whitehair, that some of these guys have earned their way into the future picture. I don't think Ryan Poles is as simplistic as I'm going to set everything on fire purely for the sake of setting things on fire. Robert Quinn is not going to be part of a 2025 Super Bowl team. Roquan Smith was going to make getting to that 2025 Super Bowl a lot harder, as everything with the St. Omni drama down to the fact that he's an inside linebacker that doesn't fit in Eberflus's system was making him hard to retain if he was going to be the soul of your team, because maybe he's not leading your locker room the direction you want them to be led, right? Not to mention he's obviously got so many memories of a regime that's now gone, and you need guys that buy in. Jackson has bought in. I mean, there's no question about it. Whitehair looks like he's on board. It's possible all these guys go. But I actually do think it's a little easier than it looks like to assume that the fire sale will just encompass absolutely everybody. And it might not quite, just because, again, if you're going to sell somebody, you have to be ready to buy somebody else that's going to be better than them, or the move was a wash and all you were was somebody with a lot of money in your wallet and nothing to own, right?
Yeah, and I think you made a lot of good points there. And I think what you talked about playing your way onto this roster, we talked about it earlier in this podcast, how Eddie Jackson was probably playing for his job this year and did so successfully. You brought up Cody Whitehair, another good one. Like, let's rewind the clock all the way to 2014 with Ryan Pace, because when Ryan Pace came in here and he took his initial assessment of this roster, I have it on pretty good authority that really the only guy that he was planning on keeping around was Kyle Long. Now, over time, he had 5 guys that ended up sticking on this roster. Kyle Long was one of them. Charles Leno, who at the time was a 7th-round rookie coming into, and he ended up earning his spot at left tackle. I don't need to hear from the Leno haters. He was a very solid left tackle for the Chicago Bears. Kyle Fuller was drafted by Phil Emery and had a bad second half of his rookie year after really flashing. Then he got hurt. And a lot of people were kind of like, Kyle Fuller is not going to be a part of this team moving forward. But he started playing well, earned himself another contract. So those kind of things can happen. Sherrick McManus and Pat O'Donnell were the other guys that ended up sticking around. So that can absolutely happen. Cody Whitehair, when Ryan Poles came in, could be like, yeah, we're not going to keep Cody Whitehair around. And now he's sitting there, maybe having second thoughts going, a veteran guard like that at that price, maybe it's worth keeping him around. To me, if I'm Ryan Poles, I'm looking at these Ryan Pace players and going, can they contribute in 2024? Not 2023, 2024. Yep. If I can get 3 years with them on my first 3 years here, then I want to keep them around unless I'm getting a phenomenal price. Eddie Jackson, Cody Whitehair would both still be under their same contracts in 2024, without basically any guaranteed money. So it's all kind of free money. They can cut them, if need be kind of thing. So are those type of guys playing their way onto the roster? They absolutely might be. Now, again, Ryan Poles has talked about how he loves offensive line. Cody Whitehair kind of going uphill because of the fact that you kind of figure Ryan Poles being an offensive lineman and how he loves talking offensive line, probably going to want 5 of his offensive linemen. And Tevin Jenkins is already making it very hard for that to be the case. So Cody Whitehair may not be on this roster, but again, and if Cody Whitehair was healthy, I think we'd have different conversations right now about the trade deadline. But it is going to be interesting. A lot of the Bears beat, and everyone, like we said, seems to think there's going to be more moves. I'm just really curious who it would be on offense where you're not destroying Justin Fields' development, and on defense, who it could be that's not named Eddie Jackson, right? And I just don't know who it is. Again, now maybe, Justin Jones maybe gets traded for a 7th-round pick that can conditionally become a 6th. I'm not talking about those type of moves, but I'm talking about substantial players. I just don't know who else there is.
Sure. And then, there's other assets on the Bears roster that just aren't asset enough to be worth trading for. What contender needs Cole Kmet? Love you, bud. But that's not really a player that anybody is out there necessarily pining for because their tight end room would see him as a massive upgrade. At least I don't think so. So I do think that there's a lot of things that as you start pulling you really start pulling the situation apart that don't make as much sense as maybe they did at first blush. Right. For instance, people talk about trading David Montgomery. If Ryan Poles really thinks running back is replaceable, Khalil Herbert might be a name that a contender looks at and is like, that guy is running like crazy. I'll give you a 3rd-round pick. And Ryan Poles looks at him and says, you're going to give me a 3rd-round pick for a running back? I mean, if you want to, like you said, everybody has a price for $1 million man. It's not that I don't think Herbert is value. I think he's really valuable. I think that a 3rd-round pick is also really valuable, and you just start weighing the cost, right?
Yeah, look, Justin Fields has a price. If a team called up Ryan Poles tomorrow and said, I'll give you 3 first-rounders for Justin Fields, he couldn't send him out the door fast enough. I think now, again, is that going to happen? No, of course it's not going to happen. Right. So it's a completely hypothetical. But it's just that thing that you have to realize. If someone's willing to pay, and if Roquan Smith, if teams were calling up saying, I'm not giving you more than a 4, then Ryan Poles may have been like, that's not worth sending him away for. But when you get a 2nd and a 5th, you make a move.
Now, if there's one deal I've got my eye on, and it's not a player, I could actually name you a bunch of players. I could name Brandon Cooks. I could name DJ Moore. I could even name Calvin Ridley, which is a name that I think a lot of people have just sort of forgotten about. But for a team with their eyes on the future, Ridley was a top 5 receiver talent in his day, and you might be able to get him for a massive budget price for obviously massive risk. But anyways, the point is, let's talk about trading receivers. Because, Bill, if there's one thing about this defense that I actually think so, Ryan Poles now trading Quinn and Roquan. Let's say that maybe we don't know the plan, but would you agree with me that it is evidencing a greater plan that's in place, and we're waiting to see what it is, correct or incorrect?
Oh, absolutely. With this much capital and this much money, there is a plan. So there may not have been a cohesive plan in March. It may have been that Poles needed this year to evaluate and kind of adjust some things and figure some things out, but there is a plan that if you're a professional GM, then yeah, there is a plan about what he wants to do between right now and week 1, 2023.
There has to be. And so if there is a plan, then Ryan Poles would be silly to not have his eyes on the future. And if he has his eyes on the future, Bill, he's going to run into the same thing that any Bears fan on Twitter will tweet at us all the time. This free agency class in wide receiver is particularly poor. I mean, not that they're great every year, right? But there's not even an option we could pretend is a number one wide receiver. And so for a defense that I won't be surprised to see the Bears attempt to add a Jalen Carter or a Will Anderson to, right? If they lose enough of these games, just in case you don't know those players, Bill, or any listener out there,
that's edge and 3-tech. Yep.
It's a superstar 3-tech. That's a superstar edge rusher, both of which would be positions that I cannot imagine a defense and ball control team like the Bears might be just pining over. There has to be some kind of other plan for addressing wide receiver, which is why I will actually open the door on a wide receiver trade. It's not just because I think it'd be some sexy move. This isn't as simple as let's build a Madden style team, Bill. This is a matter of you're acquiring resources. You now have, if you will, a bonus second round pick to work with. How do you get a number one wide receiver in a league that's just not giving them out like candy anymore? Right? Like George Pickens, for as good as George Pickens is, Alec Pierce, for as good as Alec Pierce is, neither of those guys are that guy. And most of the teams that are having a lot of success within their passing game, unless you're Patrick Mahomes, have one of those that guys. So I am going to be really interested. I mean, that's what I get the impression the Bears beat is rumbling about, or at least kind of suggesting, right? That there's some kind of move in the water. And hey, maybe it's a move for Kendrick Bourne or Nelson Aguilar. Possible, but it won't shock me. Kind of like how it didn't shock me Roquan was traded, right? To see the Bears legitimately look at what their options would be in trying to swoop up a number one wide receiver some way, somehow, because come the top of the draft, they would be silly to enter the draft with a massive hole at number one wide receiver and just hope and pray their guy gets there. You know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely. And, you brought up, those defensive players just really quickly. This defense, a great 3-tech, really excels in. Look at what DeForest Buckner did in Indianapolis. So Jalen Carter to me, and I want them to go offense. I just want to shower Justin Fields with people around him. But if they're sitting there with the 4th pick in the draft or 5th pick in the draft and Jalen Carter is sitting there, they absolutely could make that move, and it would make a lot of sense. Now, talking about building this wide receiver core, and here's what's interesting. I was talking to a few people about this yesterday, is if you're Ryan Poles, and I agree, we're talking about how important the it guy is at wide receiver, especially this year with how defenses have kind of adjusted and said, I'll let you beat me with the short stuff and the running and running the ball, but I'm not going to let you beat me mid-range and deep. But the it guys are still getting open. You're not scheming open, Dante Pettis, but the it guys are getting open. So with that in mind, looking at how he's going to structure the wide receivers things, the wide receiver room moving forward, right? All right, Velus Jones is going to be a part of that thing. Let's look at Velus Jones and let's put him as a wide receiver 4. Gadget guy, special teams, can do a couple different things, utilize his speed, kind of use him like maybe a Cordarrelle Patterson kind of thing. Let's put him there. They still need 3 wide receivers up top, and you can look at how they can structure those 3. But would they pay 2 receivers in that 20 million plus range? Because Darnell Mooney, if Justin Fields wants him around and Ryan Poles decides he's going to keep him around, I think that contract is going to be pushing $20 million a year. And I know people are going to say that Darnell Mooney's not going to get $20 million a year.
He is.
But I think he is, especially when you talk about how the wide receivers' salaries are going to go up here over the next couple of years. I think if he doesn't get 20 million, he's getting 18 or 19.
Bill, I'll jump in and give you the mic back in a minute. If he'd had any bigger season this year, he'd be getting 25. So the $20 million is the budget number, because that's going to, you got to remember, if you're paying Deontay Johnson's price 2 years later on an extension, that's cheap. This is 2 years of inflation afterwards, 10% cap increases every single time. That number is a lot more sane than it sounds today. Imagine 500 days from now, Darnell Mooney gets his first piece of a $20 million check. That's where this money is. Back to you, Bill.
All right. So exactly right. So are you going to go out and trade for, let's just, DJ Moore? It's a popular name that I know the Panthers said they're not moving him. That's a popular, or T. Higgins or someone like that. You're going to go out and you're going to trade for one of those guys. And then obviously you're going to pay him because you just traded assets for him. You're going to pay him $20 million and you're going to pay Darnell Mooney $20 million. I don't think Ryan Poles is going to do that. I don't have any information, any sources. I don't think he's going to do that. What I think they're going to do is keep Darnell Mooney, and he's that guy, or maybe move Darnell Mooney and bring in a different guy that you think is better and is going to be better for this offense. I don't think they're both. Then I think next year you bring in a free agent like a Jacoby Myers type that is going to be less than $20 million, in that $13-14 million range. And then on top of that, now you've got three basically, top, 55 picks. You need to take you don't have to take a wide receiver with your first pick.
Nope.
And I would love some of those guys up top there. They look a lot of fun, and I'd love to see them in a Bears uniform. But you can get a lot of star receivers in the second round. A lot of star receivers in the second round. So I would absolutely sit there. If I'm Ryan Poles and I'm trying to build my 6 wide receivers for 2023, I'm either keeping Mooney or I'm bringing in a new receiver to replace Mooney. I know that sounds crazy, but I'm looking at it that way. I'm bringing in a first round, second round draft pick. I'm bringing in a mid-range free agent that I signed. I've got Vellis. I'm kind of thinking N'Keal Harry would be a good guy to keep around. Big body. He can block. He can catch contested balls as kind of that backup role who could step in and be the big body that you might need. And then maybe, we see Ryan Poles likes to trade down day 3, 5th, 6th, 7th round wide receiver, grab another one who can also play special teams. Like that's kind of how I would build my wide receiver core. So while I some of those names out there, because the free agency, the top of the free agent at wide receiver isn't good. So if you want to come out and get a big target, you absolutely need to trade for one, and you have an opportunity to do that now. But I just don't know if they're going to trade a wide receiver, pay that wide receiver, and pay Darnell Mooney.
I don't either, but I will tell you, Bill, they have an awful lot of money. And so one of these positions is going to get the middle tier free agent. Wouldn't surprise me if that's potentially a tackle that's brought in, like a Jack Conklin type. Wouldn't surprise me if that's a defensive tackle, an edge rusher, though there's not a lot of edge rushers out there to pay. That's a position that you generally have to draft, and where somebody like Will Anderson might make a little bit more sense. It's why this is going to be a wild ride. If I got to choose, I would throw the money at the trenches, because I think that if you can go from, honestly, Bill, if we're talking about their defensive line, you're going from D- up to B-, B, or even B+. You get a lot better. Your defensive line doesn't have to be one of the greatest defensive lines in football. It's great to get there, right? But whether it's Bradley Chubb, who was somebody mentioned is free, and that actually might be quite a solid ad for the Bears, because you go from, again, a 5th round pick in Dominique Robinson, a good looking 5th round pick, but a rotational edge rusher all the same, to a legitimate starting edge rusher. Maybe you get a David Onyemata from the Saints. You get better at that nose tackle 3-tech position. You look in the draft. It's always hard, I think, to go into the draft with a clear and obvious hole the way Pace used to, right? I mean, truly, Bill, Pace couldn't have made it easier for us couch analysts, because we got to look at the team and say, so this year they're taking a tight end and then probably a corner. And then boom, boom, Cole Kmet, Jalen Johnson.
The David Montgomery draft was
just obvious, right? If it was socially acceptable for them to have taken a kicker in 2019, they would have. It was just, it's always been a bad idea. So it's going to be really interesting to see how this all shakes out. Obviously Ryan Poles has a plan, but it wouldn't surprise me if after a win like the Patriots, this locker room's starting to congeal a little bit. If the Bears were 1-5, if they were where the Texans were, even Bill, if they were where the Lions were, I think I would be a lot more worried about the potential damage that trades like this could do to an already breaking locker room. But the locker room has to be seeing the reward that's in front of their eyes, right? They've beaten some good teams. teams that have gone out and beaten plenty of other teams, like the 5-2 Jets that got beat by the same Patriots squad that lost inside their house. We'll have to see how it all goes. But here, as we get off the phone, because I know you got to go and trick-or-treaters are about to show up at my house, what are your final thoughts on the Roquan Smith trade and if there's anybody next?
Yeah, look, I think someone else is getting traded, and it may not be significant, but I think we may see, I mentioned Justin Jones, Angelo Blackson, like those type of guys where someone's like, yeah, I'll give you a conditional 7. Like, remember when DeAndre Hall got traded to the Eagles years ago and it was just a conditional 7? Like, I could see some of that kind of stuff happening because Poles clearly likes to move around on day 3. But, anyone significant, that's going to surprise me, but it won't shock me. Roquan Smith shocked me because I didn't think it was going to happen. But now that that's happened, the door is absolutely open for any other potential trades of any of these veteran players that someone says, yeah, I'll throw you a day 3 pick for them. Non-day 3 picks, we mentioned the David Montgomerys and the Eddie Jacksons are the guys that are going to be targeted. I just had, maybe Darnell Mooney, but those are the guys that I just think could significantly hurt the product on the field. And at some point, yes, if you're not going to fit into the future, then, see you later kind of thing, but not at the detriment that the players on the field can't develop because there's too many holes and you're just chasing guys down from behind. So, like I said at the beginning of this podcast, I support this move because I'm not a guy that likes to pay linebackers or running backs $20 million a year. So, again, I support the move, and I think AJ Klein, like I said, is just a body, but a 2nd and a 5th round pick. I think that was a big offer the Ravens came in on, and Ryan Poles said, "Well, then Roquan Smith is yours."
Yep. Look, here's where I'm at, Bill. Earlier in the offseason, you and I were talking. You and I and the whole Windy City Gridiron crew were talking. We were asking, what do you think of Ryan Poles' offseason, his first season so far as GM? You hated it. I looked back at you and I said, I'm only not going to hate it if it turns out that Poles commits to tanking, because this doesn't make sense if you're not all in. And after the Robert Quinn trade, it was like, hey, he's at least thinking about the future. But this Roquan Smith move is a great sign that this organization, at least in my opinion, they have a plan, even if it's unpopular. They traded Khalil. They have now traded almost every single face of the franchise that the Bears had, like, period, because most of them were on defense. Khalil Mack is gone. Roquan Smith is gone. Robert Quinn is gone. Your sack leader, your former top 10 pick, like the guy that you traded so much for in 2018. And because of that, Bill, I suddenly start to look at the fact that Matt Eberflus over the last 4 weeks has now aggressively gone for 4th downs, aggressively taken 2-point conversion opportunities when they've been on the table. I'm really coming around to the way this group is thinking, because for better or for worse, so many people have wanted to see a Ravens style, analytically driven. It doesn't always have to be the numbers, right? I mean, you listen to the CBS Sports crew and Howie Long, Jimmy Johnson, and any of them will tell you the analytics are going too far. And I'm not trying to push us there, Bill, but it's really cool to see the way this regime is starting to think. And I personally am excited to see what happens next. I'm even thinking already, could you trade down out of the 2nd round and collect 2 third-round picks somewhere in there and grab a linebacker with one of those 3rd-round picks? Because that's a hot spot to grab inside linebacking talent. I mean, this gives Ryan Poles a ton of options so that whatever way the draft board falls, we don't have to do what we did during the Ryan Pace era, where we just hope and pray that the guy that we all are staring at falls to the board. But instead, I mean, Bill, let's say it out loud. Braxton Jones is starting to chain decent looking games together. His run blocking is really bubbling to the forefront. I'm not about to try to pretend that Ryan Poles' plan is faultless or that his draft class will remain faultless. There really isn't a great way to beat the draft, as a lot of data has shown us. But the only way to try is to take more shots. And these kinds of picks, the fact that they not only got a 2nd round pick, they got a 5th round pick too. Like, that could be, Bill, a starting running back. That could be a sweet, like, backup corner. And yes, depth matters. That could be a sweet center. You just don't know until the draft board falls that way. I, for one, I'm excited about the move. I'm excited to see how they spend the money, but I'm trying to remain metered because there's nothing more exciting, Bill, than having a ton of resources until you draft Clennon Farrell, number 4 overall, follow it up with Josh Jacobs, and suddenly the Raiders went from, wow, we have so much money to, oh my word, our team is awful. How did we get here? Right? It's not just about accruing resources. You spend them well too.
Absolutely. The NFL has proven you cannot. Now, you want to sit there and talk about a team like the Rams, you cannot buy a championship. And people sit there, oh, F them picks, the Rams bought a championship. Go look at who the Rams drafted on, like in the round 3 and 4 and 5 with those picks they had. They made them count. They found contributors. So you can sit there and be flagrant with your first round picks and second round picks and go out and go after big name players and go trade for them. But the Rams still drafted intelligently and found contributors. You cannot buy a team. This isn't the New York Yankees in baseball, 15 years ago, where you just can put 20 million at every position. You have to draft well. Ryan Poles, he may have had a couple misses, but it looks like he also had a few hits, and you're not going to hit everyone. You have to be pretty pleased. It's still obviously too early to give him a grade, but you have to be pretty pleased with the talent that Ryan Poles found. And if he understands what Ryan Pace didn't, because I still sit here and support that Ryan Pace was a good drafter, and someone will sit there and throw some of the busts at me, and I understand Adam Shaheen in the second round was terrible, but he found a lot of talent in the rounds 4 and rounds 5. A lot of his players panned out, but he didn't give himself enough swings. And right now it looks like Ryan Poles is going to give himself enough swings. And you come in with 20 first and second year players out of the draft, and probably, the 8, 10, 12 free agents that are going to come in as well. Well, you're going to have a brand new roster with just a few of the pace guys left. And it's going to be very interesting to see how this all comes together next offseason for Ryan Poles.
Because, hey, Bill, just to see if maybe I can even win you over a little bit. If in the offseason you were trying to cobble together the best receiving group that you could for Justin Fields, would you have come up with a receiver group that would have taken your flexibility away to pivot to this run-heavy quick game attack that really seems to be opening things up for Fields? I mean, Fields right now is still not playing well in the quick game. That's fine, though, because they're using his legs and the fact that he's really solid in option football, basically, to it's practically like running the veer on first down so that they can set up other stuff that he did at Ohio State. If you had paid big money for Marquez Valdes-Scantling, now you got to keep him. And the Bears basically just kept all their cards. If somehow Fields can develop anyways this year, I would argue that Ryan Poles set him and Fields up for maximum success because they've figured the blueprint out. Right? They didn't even really know the blueprint. They knew they had to get away from whatever Nagy tried to do, but what could Fields do? They had a bunch of pieces. They didn't have the puzzle, right? I can't help but think that Roquan, who was just not a part of the future, I think you could see it in this defense, that you compare him to what they've done with Fields. They're stocking the cupboard. It's going to be a matter of how they deploy it. But either way, Bill, we've just got to hope that, maybe you were hoping you do. Maybe you're hoping we don't, that we're not having to come back and record another one of these in just 3 hours after some other slam dunk trade. Yeah. What else do you have coming up that you can tell the people about as we sign off?
Yeah, like I said, there'll be a podcast out this week. Searching for a guest right now as Adam Johns is postponed a week, but we'll get something together and get something out there. Obviously, a lot to talk about. We'll dive into the Roquan Smith trade a little bit. We'll dive into, I feel like I've talked about all this, a lot already because we've done 2 hours now of podcasting about this. But we'll hit it all on my podcast. And like I said, look for Adam Johns next week on my podcast, and like I said, this is, look, it's a fun time to be a Bears fan because Justin Fields is coming into his own. If you weren't drinking some random Kool-Aid you found in a sewer, you understood what this season was with the Bears. So you knew there were going to be some lumps along the way. And now we're seeing an opportunity for Ryan Poles' plan to come into focus next year. And I'll say this, if Justin Fields is that dude, and he looks like he is, the expectations with the amount of draft picks they have, where you're now expecting 3 or 4 new starters in the draft coming out, 3 or 4 new starters next year coming out of this draft, and the 4, 5, 6, 7 starters, whatever they end up deciding to do in free agency. You're going to see a lot of new faces that can play football at the NFL level. And this team, the expectations for this team next year, if Justin Fields can be the guy at quarterback, is going to be like 10 wins. It's going to be one of these teams where they're the Cincinnati Bengals and make that big jump.
Bill,
that's what we're going to be looking at. So this could be a fun, next 12 months for the Bears.
And of course, Bill, for crying out loud, because we are fans of the team. Anytime we project 10 wins, there's going to be somebody else out there that says, don't you mean 14? But we'll get there when we get there. All the same, as usual, like I'm digging into the All 22 now, so I will see all of you guys tomorrow night, 8 p.m. Wednesday, as we talk through exactly what's going on with the Bears All 22. But until then, Bears fans, bear down, and thanks so much for bearing with us. Bill, we are officially recorded. Okay, I wanted to thank specifically John D'Italia and Joe Calzagano for your donations. You asked questions that I like to hope we addressed in the podcast. Feel free to let me know if we didn't. Bill, I know you've got to run because you said you got to go somewhere, right?
I got to get ready and get out the door in about 30 minutes.
That's what I figured. Perfect. Oh yeah, you got plenty of time. We're not loaded with questions, so I may go ahead and pack it up because it is Halloween and it is trick-or-treating time, but it's my son's first Halloween, which is awfully exciting. But what a wild trade, all things told. I think it's great. Honestly, I do. Because Jay Sanders, I think in here, like, I get what you're saying. I kind of want to highlight this one. It's controversial, but like Bears fans have loser mindsets. You want high draft picks instead of Super Bowl rings. I hear you, but I think that Roquan has shown he's been so bad on this team that I don't know. I get it. He picked off 2 passes, but to me, Bill, I can't help but think that you want your I can't help but think that there are a lot of linebackers that can collect a tipped interception. They're the things that other linebackers are doing across the league that Roquan coulda, shoulda, woulda been doing. We haven't been seeing. And some of that is defensive line, sure, but you got to go budget somewhere on the team, right? Like you can't spend everywhere, right?
Right. And that's kind of what we talked about with would they have 220 million wide receivers? No, probably not, because you can't look. Let's look at it this way. And the high draft picks instead of Super Bowl rings. Yes, you want the high draft picks when you're in the middle of a rebuild, which is what they are now. No, we all want the Super Bowl rings, but it's been 35 years since they've had a team good enough to win a Super Bowl. I understand they had, the team that lost to Peyton Manning and the Colts, but that was Rex Grossman at quarterback. Trent Dilfer won a Super Bowl 20 years ago with one of the top 3 defenses of all time. You need a quarterback to win Super Bowls, and the Bears haven't had one, and that's what's been frustrating. But you've got to be careful with how you allocate your resources. And I will bring up Ryan Pace, because Ryan Pace, to his credit, built a phenomenal defense. He built the best defense in the NFL in 2018. Mm-hmm. Yes, Vic Fangio's scheme, and John Fox was the guy who brought in Trevathan and all that, but that was Ryan Pace's defense. He drafted Jackson. He drafted Amos. He signed Amukamara. Yes, Kyle Fuller was there, but he kept him around. He drafted Roquan. He drafted Goldman. He made the big trade for Mack. That was his team. That was, Leonard Floyd was his pick. He made that defense. But he was so focused on that defense, they weren't spending a ton on offense. They did the, the Trubisky draft, obviously, sprinkled with Shaheen and Whitehair and all that, but they didn't invest on the offense. So what happened to the defense, after 2018? Well, now they didn't have enough money for Adrian Amos. See you later. They didn't have enough money for Bryce Callahan. See you later. Then they tried to start pushing money into the future. So Ryan Pace spent all this on defense, couldn't keep the defense together, tried to be like, okay, we can lose Amos because we have Eddie Jackson. We'll try Clinton Dix. We can lose Leonard Floyd because we have Khalil Mack. That didn't work. So next thing you know, he's spending on Robert Quinn. He spent so much money on the defense that, one, he couldn't keep it together when those next guys were due contracts, and he didn't have any money to spend on offense. So he goes and spends on Jimmy Graham and punts all his money into the future and does all these crappy maneuvers because that's all he had the ability to do. So when you sit here, and that's why I kind of was upset when they drafted two guys in the secondary, because you combine that with Eddie Jackson and with Jalen Johnson, you're like, you will not be able to keep this secondary together for more than a couple seasons.
Nope.
Because you just can't allocate your resources that way. So that's why I like GMs who are careful about how they do that. And that's where I don't want to just spend obscene amounts of money at wide receiver or obscene amounts of money on the secondary. You have to spread it out. And I do not want, when that's the situation, I don't care how much money they have next year. Eventually the bill comes due. I don't want money at running back, and I don't want money at linebacker unless it's an edge.
Yep. And look, I mean, I think that there's an aspect of proof in the pudding. Like, I think Roquan has looked really, really poor in run defense. And we've gotten, unfortunately, like a very transparent look at that because, yes, you need better defensive line, but it's like, I would have expected Roquan to make a lot of the plays that he just hasn't made this year. And at least in my opinion, that's a huge reason why you can't pay him the bill that I think he was going to get paid. And Bill, I really do worry, like I alluded to in the podcast, that linebackers are replaceable enough that you could get 85% of Roquan Smith for a tenth of the cost. But also I worry that Roquan's going to get paid and then nobody's going to quite approach that afterwards. I mean, maybe you'll get specific players like Joke over at Cleveland, but then again, Cleveland's going through some major turmoil himself. I mean, we'll have to see what happens. But
and look, I'll be fair to Roquan. I don't know if you can get 85% of Roquan for 10% of the price, but I think you could probably get 50 to 60% of Roquan for that price. And with guys like Brisker who have the ability to come up, and if you beef up the defensive line, that's enough.
I can't help but think, Bill, that now, granted, you know that old phrase, like they don't make them like they used to. I don't have any idea if there are any like thumper linebackers left, like coming out of college, because everybody in college is focused on pass defense,
yeah.
right?
You have to cover as a linebacker. And look, and Roquan can do that usually.
Usually, but the Bears haven't exactly used him as a coverage linebacker this year.
No.
So it's not like they're getting value out of him there either. They want a Darius Leonard. Like Jay Sanders, I hear you saying that linebackers fill gaps, not holes, but guys like Shaq Leonard now, Shaquille Leonard, he has been a hole filler for the Colts. When the defensive line hasn't quite made the play, he's been there. That's been his ism. That's why he's paid like a superstar. It's also worth remembering that, at least in my opinion, I mean, I'm curious to hear what you think, Bill. I can't help thinking that you have to elevate yourself as a player to be worth that mega money. Fred Warner plays like he's two people in coverage. I mean, watching the way he moves around, it is unbelievable. Watching the amount of ground he is able to cover while still slipping by people and making plays in the run. You can understand why you would pay him, I mean, literally, like he's two defenders at once. When with Roquan Smith, I just can't help thinking that with the number that he wanted to hit, he was never going to be more than one solid linebacker. Right? This always turns into Roquan sucks. I can't believe you guys think Roquan sucks. Roquan does not suck. He has not looked comfortable in this defense. 8 games in, it didn't really get any better. The fact that he's leading the league in tackles or whatever really doesn't make a difference to me, because I care a lot more about defensive stops. I saw something, I think a tweet, that said that Roquan Smith right now is one of the highest linebackers in terms of positive plays. Right, Bill? But it also said he's the second worst linebacker in terms of negative plays. And that, to me, has described the Roquan Smith experience. And I don't think that a player that's that inconsistent is somebody that you can pay mega money to at a position that just demands consistency. Because at least with Nick Kwiatkowski, within that framework of that 2019 season he had, you knew exactly what he could and you knew exactly what he couldn't do. I get you, Jay Sanders, saying he's one player, he can't do everything. And if if the Bears trade Eddie Jackson, I'm going to sound just like you, because you sound like you really love Roquan Smith. There's nothing wrong with that. And I'm not projecting anything weird. We all have our favorite players. And if the Bears had done Akeem Hicks dirty, Bill, I would have been angry during the time that he was there, because that was one of my absolute favorite players on this team.
I was right there with you.
Bill, you're angry because the Bears did Justin Fields kind of dirty this offseason. Like when somebody crosses our favorite player, like, ooh, you can get mad, right? But at the same time, I can't help but think that there are more important positions. Like, to use an example, Bill, if we kind of mentioned this on the podcast, but if you lost Roquan, you probably lose one extra game on the season, right? If you still had Roquan, but you lost Eddie Jackson, how many more games do you think you lose? Is it just one, or is it more than that?
And that's the thing. And I think it's potentially more than that, because I think that opens the door for your secondary to have holes again, where 49 points given up to Dallas becomes the norm and not the exception.
I mean, huge touchdown runs would just get a lot more common. Plus, I'm curious as to where they'd have Brisker play. Like maybe they'd have one of their other safeties like jump on or like jump into that center field role. But I don't actually know if it's not like they don't have another safety to play that role, but it's more to say, Bill, that Dane Cruikshank makes a lot more sense to literally stand in for how did I forget Brisker? Like, yeah. And then you'd have maybe DeAndre Houston Carson, who's like a dime backer.
Carson is probably, it's probably.
Oh gosh, he doesn't have the beef. I mean, as much as we would make fun of Eddie Jackson's tackling, like you put DHC trying to stop a running back that's already hit full speed, and things get a lot harder. I mean, think about all the runs that that Khalil Herbert has broken off of tackles exactly like that. You know, right. A smaller back or a safety that's just a little bit slower to the hole. Woohoo, gone. And so I don't know. I think it's really hard for a player like Roquan. I mean, to be fair, Bill, you're kind of talking to the number one linebacker hater maybe in the NFL. Like, unless a linebacker is really especially wonderful, I mean, they just don't get my attention. Not really. And I care more about finding value at that position. But I think that I also think that I miss a lot of things with linebackers, just calling my bias what it is. I'm not even trying to pretend that I'm holistically right. All I can do is give you my opinion. And my opinion is that I will take corner one, corner two, nickel corner, safety one, safety two, defensive, or like three tech, nose tackle, edge, and edge two before I will take a linebacker if I got to pick in order of superstar player. But that's just me.
And look, and if you split the defense into the 12 positions, right? With basically your base and your nickel back, and you use those as your 12 positions. Other than Sam, Roquan's playing the least important position on the field as far as I'm concerned. So,
not that Eberflus would tell you that in an interview. To be fair to anybody that says, well, the will linebacker is one of the most important positions in this defense. He has said it is, but if it is, Roquan has not been living up to the bill, because I don't feel like he's made the impact that the quote most important position in the defense is. And Jay Sanders, you say you think Sanborn is Urlacher. I think we just think he's a UDFA that'll play like a UDFA, right, Bill? Where it's like, hey, if you're going to be bad, be cheap.
And look, and here's the thing, Sanborn may just be a turnstile, right? And he just may be a disaster out there. That may happen. But if Jack Sanborn can play his way into a decent, where he is worthy of starting, but he is your worst starter kind of a thing, but you got him out of a UDFA and you're getting that kind of bargain, well, that's great. And you can have guys like Brisker and Jackson behind him, and if you beef up and you get like a Jalen Carter in front of him, then he's going to be able to move freely and do some things. And that's all we're talking about. Roquan Smith was one of the best at his position. He wasn't the best, but he was one of the best in the NFL, despite his inconsistent play this year. No one is sitting here saying that Roquan Smith is bad. Nobody is saying that. He is a good player, a very good player. But in terms of the role he had moving forward, the amount of money that was going to come his way at the expense of paying at other positions, it was a smart move for Ryan Poles to make this move. They are in a rebuild, Jay Sanders. They are not winning this year. They are probably not winning next year. I mean, they may win some games, but I'm talking about, getting to an NFC championship game, getting to a Super Bowl. So they need to rebuild. And Ryan Pace left Ryan Poles with one of the most, one of the least talented rosters in the league. So what did Poles do? He went out and got the resources he could for the talented players that he had left, and he's trying to rebuild this thing. And that's just because Ryan Pace, the last couple of years he was here, was not worried about building the Chicago Bears. He was worried about saving his job. Right. And I'm not faulting him for that. That is what George McCaskey did. He set up Pace and Nagy in that way, that they needed to try and save their jobs. So last year was a debacle of them trying to save their jobs while trying to and win games while trying to develop a quarterback. The two don't mesh.
Yep.
And now Ryan Poles is trying to fix the mess that he inherited, and he's going to do it in 1 year, which is impressive. And now we're just going to see what he's going to do with that.
Right. And hey, for the commenters that are piling on, we don't need to be piling on. I have a feeling that Jay Sanders just really likes Roquan Smith, sees him as a prototypical Fangio linebacker. He's absolutely right. I don't think this defense is the Fangio defense, Bill. That's the whole problem, is that in the Fangio defense, you've already prioritized the linebackers fundamentally not really having to do any run work. And in this defense, that's not Eberflus's plan. And somebody like Nick Morrow is getting his hands a little bit dirtier in the run game, and I think he's ultimately making more of those down to down plays, not the interceptions, obviously, because his head was already downhill, or honestly, he does a whole lot of the Tampa 2 cover stuff, so he's just not even close to the ball when it gets tipped in the air. But anyways, moving on. They did bring up one more question, and then I gotta go. Bill, in your opinion, who do you think is more likely to win a Super Bowl now, Robert Quinn or Roquan Smith?
Robert Quinn. I think, look, the Ravens are a good team. And now, are you talking about this year, or you're talking about, moving forward? Because there is a difference. If you're talking about this year,
let's talk next 2 years.
If you're talking
the
about,
Bills look mega good
in the, because Roquan Smith is going to be with a great organization that has a quarterback, yes, in the next few years, he's going to get that opportunity. But for the next couple of years, that's the Buffalo Bills' conference. And, you still got the Chiefs to deal with. The Eagles, right now, I don't see a team in the NFC that can beat the Eagles, which I am really surprised to say that, because I did not think this team was going to be this good. They've got a really soft schedule. They are going to go 15-2, 16-1. I mean, a really soft schedule. So they're going to have home field. The rest of this NFC is not coming together. So the Eagles are going to probably have a place at the table this year. Can they beat Buffalo? No, I don't think so. But if Buffalo does get knocked off by another team in the AFC playoffs, then I think absolutely that Robert Quinn has a good chance to win this year.
Hey, Bill, it's just never as easy as everything going according to paper, right? Like, for all we know, the Bills do get to the Super Bowl, but en route to the Super Bowl, they do exactly what KC did. What was that, 2 years ago? They lose both their starting tackles and the math changes. I mean, if I did get the chance, for instance, like, the crazy part about this, Bill, is that I'm not convinced that Robert Quinn's going to be anything more than a rotational edge rusher. And if you have one of the most legendary benders in college football as a rotational third down specialist edge rusher for a 4th round pick, are you crazy? Like, especially if you catch a break and the team that you're playing anytime between now and the Super Bowl doesn't have a solid left tackle ready for him. Roquan Smith is a forced fumble waiting to happen. Like, it's or not Roquan Smith, Robert Quinn. Quinn's
or Robert Smith, if you want to combine them into one person.
Exactly. Quinn's one of those players that I can't help but think that he makes a lot of sense for the Eagles here, which, by the way, how funny is it that 2 organizations that we Bears fans would consider very well run are the very 2 organizations that the Bears traded here with, like Howie Roseman and the Ravens organization, which it's really interesting at that point. Like, I'm super, super interested to see the way things progress. I completely hear you, Jay Sanders, on being a Bears fan since the 80s. You've seen this tons and tons of times. I do not blame you. I mean, Bill, sometimes I don't know how you and Lester and even JB, like some of our more veteran Bears fans, have stuck it out through so many of these things. Like, were you there for the Cade McNown era?
Oh, yeah.
How did you... Can I ask you a silly question?
Cade McNown is my most hated player in Chicago Bears history.
Is there anything, Bill, while I've got you, between the way Poles is running the team right now, which is obviously different, right, and the way that you have seen this team run in the past, that you at the very least think gives them a shot at success? Or is the difference just the quarterback?
Yeah, well, look, you got to have the quarterback, but here's what I will say in terms of what's improving. The McCaskies finally understand that they don't know what they're doing. All right. That was an important step to take, because Michael McCaskey used to run this entire team and make terrible decisions, just absolutely atrocious decisions. He finally understood, you know what I need? I need a general manager. They didn't have a general manager in the 90s. I don't know if Bears fans realize that. The owner just made all the decisions. It was a terrible structure. And the 90s was one of the most devoid decades in Chicago Bears history, maybe the worst decade in Chicago Bears history. Then he finally realized they had to have a GM. So now you find Jerry Angelo was the first GM they had since the 85 Bears.
Are you kidding me? He was the first GM they had since the 85 Bears?
Was the GM. He left, and they never replaced him. They had some football operations guys, but they did not have a general manager until Jerry Angelo.
What?
Yeah, that's how bad this organization was.
And then they immediately turned it around and went to a Super Bowl?
Shocking, right? Shocking that happens. So then they realize after Jerry Angelo is gone, they didn't quite get it right, I didn't think, with Phil Emery. And then Ryan Pace comes in and goes, no, you need to modernize this. And he redoes Hallis Hall, and he does some different things with nutrition.
So that modernization was like, I mean, it was probably like taking some 60s infrastructure and being like, let's talk about, have you ever heard the word nutrition? Like, I mean, when you say modernize, you're not talking about a high bar, are you?
Yeah, no, exactly. Because they had nothing. And now Ryan Poles comes in. He's bringing more analytics and stuff, everything. So the Bears are kind of always trailing, but you hope eventually that one of these GMs is going to catch them up the rest of the way with the rest of the league. But it as a Bears fan, look, it's long, it's painful. And, the bottom line is you need a quarterback. And I think the Bears have one. It's not going to be, traditional. It's not going to be what they tried to get with Rex Grossman or Cade McNown or Jay Cutler. It's going to be a fun offense. It's going to be a different kind of offense. But you have the quarterback, and I think Ryan Poles does have the understanding of what it takes to build a successful roster. I didn't like how he started it, and I don't need to hash in everything. Limited resources. I did not want him to punt anything into the future. I just wanted limited resources spent on offense, not defense. That's it. That's all I was going for. But, the bottom line is the Bears have slowly been getting better with this the last 25 years. And I think Pace had a much better understanding than Emery. And I think Poles has a better understanding than Pace.
Hey,
and hopefully Poles is the guy.
You know what? I wish I had my little drawing tool, but I'll just try to use my hands, right? If the current of the NFL has flowed this way, right? And the Bears, after that long period of not having a GM, have since started chasing it, the hope would be, Bill, that Ryan Pace is the moment where they're finally ahead of the current for the first time in what maybe feels like ever, where they're making decisions like the Khalil Mack trade, where you're going, are you kidding me? What are you doing? And maybe this kind of thing can come together and work out. I love the fact that the dog isn't walking the management at this stage. Like, the Bears aren't allowing some talent, like Roquan Smith, extremely talented player, on a different timeline. Jay Sanders, I think you'd agree with this. Him going to Baltimore makes more sense for him. It is a win for Roquan Smith. It's a win for the Bears. I think this is a mutual win, because it was going to take years before the Bears were playing their best football. And and Roquan's ready to play it now, wherever he goes. And he's basically going to be stepping in for the role that Patrick Quinn has been kind of a letdown in. And I think he's going to be a beast. And so at this stage, Bill, we're seeing the Bears prime to load around a quarterback. And if we've seen anything with Josh Allen, okay, now to be fair, we've got two tails, right? We've got Josh Allen, we've got Herbert, Justin Herbert, one of which has loaded really well around their team, or like the quarterback, and one that maybe hasn't. But so you look at this, the Eagles just swarmed around Jalen Hurts. The Dolphins have built a beautiful team around Tua Tagovailoa that if Dak showed us anything, if Tua plays okay, to like Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle are problems that I do not think that the Bears are equipped to solve right now. You know what I mean? Like I just don't look like they have the juice. And so within that, Bill, I am hoping that we end up looking back together saying, I didn't even realize just how on the right track we were, but it's going to take some really good draft picks. And that is always a gamble, as well as a lot of money in the right places. We're just going to have to see what happens at this point.
Yeah, no, look, and that's the thing is Ryan Poles is giving himself swings in the draft. Mm-hmm. That was the one thing, a lot of us armchair, analysts talked about with Ryan Pace. He keeps trading up. He keeps trading away picks. He is not giving himself enough swings in the draft. When he swings, he hits 400. He does a good job, but he's not swinging enough. And Ryan Poles looks like he's going to take a lot of swings. And Trevor, yes, Just on the comments there, Jim Finks was the guy behind the 85 Bears. He was the one that put 90% of that talent on the field, but he left before 1985. Kind of like Dale Talon with the Blackhawks was the guy that brought in Patrick Kane and Jonathan Daves, and he was gone, and Stan Bowman reaped the benefits. Finks kind of the same way. But yeah,
Bill,
it doesn't matter that after Venisi, there was no GM.
Bill, so an hour ago, Clay Harbor tweeted out, I think David Montgomery could be next. There's more tweet there. I don't need to read it. But Jeff Hughes, who's been a surprisingly solid Bears source, says multiple teams are interested. So, I mean, he's a guy who has generally had the pulse on the Bears over the last little while. Who's to say that his sources are, let's say, fresh on exactly what's going on? But it could be possible. Like,
look, Montgomery is the guy that makes the most sense to trade. I just have significant concerns about what that would do to their running game and Justin Fields' development. And I am not the biggest David Montgomery supporter. I just told you I don't want to pay a running back.
Absolutely. I mean, if anything, Bill, I would imagine that the entire roster right now. So if you call the Bills, obviously, and you asked what would it take to get Stephon Diggs, they're gonna swear at you. Right? Like a contending team isn't even going to field the call. It's not worth the time. The Bears, I would argue, are in the state where literally everybody, you already said this, but just for the people who haven't been there, like the entire roster is a menu and they just cost different prices. Like you want Jalen Johnson, it's going to cost you 2 first-round picks, but you can have him. Like it's
like you could call Buffalo right now and offer them your next 10 first-round picks. And they may just say no. As ludicrous as that is, because they're just going to say, okay, we are the best team in the NFL and we're going to punt away our Super Bowl.
Right. Exactly. Like it would be silly. And so right now I'm super curious because it also, okay, I don't know if you've seen this, Bill, because I sometimes I don't know how nerdy you are, but data has shown that GMs treat picks that are not their picks very differently than they treat their picks. And that has me wondering if you got a third for Montgomery, for instance, like,
see you later.
Well, of course, see you later. But if you got a third for Montgomery, well, now you're sitting on an extra second, an extra third, and an extra fifth. And maybe you, as Ryan Poles, start calling around because if the Panthers charge you 130% of DJ Moore's worth, no, you don't take that trade. But if you think DJ Moore's worth a first-round pick and you can get him for a second and a third that don't quite add up to a first-round pick, now it might be worthwhile. I mean, especially with the A.J. Brown trade, which I still don't quite understand why the Titans did that or why they thought it was the smart move, but, wish him the best. Like, we're seeing these receivers get moved. T. Higgins, another option where he was a second-round pick. And, Bill, you've seen it. Draft prestige follows these players. Roquan Smith likely garnered a second-round pick because he was a top 10 linebacker, or like he was a top 10 pick at linebacker, and it can be that simple. 2 All-Pros, yes, but top 10 pick at linebacker sticks with people.
Same exact result. I understand fifth-year options a little different.
Sure.
But same results as a 4th-round pick. Roquan Smith was a 4th-round pick who just came in and dominated the league, and it was just great to see. Yeah, probably not the same.
Probably not the same. And so T. Higgins isn't a first-rounder. You could theoretically offer the Bengals more than they drafted T. Higgins with. They might be interested. I don't know. I mean, it depends on how the Bengals view things, but their cap is going to be tough to put together. So I don't know what the Bears will do. They probably could use an X receiver. And in theory, if you can't buy one in the offseason because there's none to buy, you got to look elsewhere. But we're just going to have to see what happens. Bill, I can talk to you all night.
Before we split, what is your price for David Montgomery?
I would probably I would trade David Montgomery as it stands right now for a 3 and no less. I would trade Brandon Robinson.
Funny. I talk about how I don't want to get rid of David Montgomery, but I would trade him for a 4. I'd have no problem with that. The 5th, 6, 7, I'm keeping him. 3, 4, I'm trading him. 5 is my question. That's where I'm not sure.
If you gave me a 4th and a 5th, or a 4th and a future 4th, 2 picks, I'm interested. But 1 pick, he's just the best pass protector that the Bears have. And like you're saying, I'm going to consider that like an OL 5.5, right? Because at that point, once you start hitting the spot where you've traded away everybody that could make Justin Fields successful, I do get frustrated. And he's the best pass catching back on the team.
Oh,
right?
best pass catching back, pass block. Look, it's funny. The only thing he isn't the best at his position on the team is running the football.
Exactly. I mean, with Fields. But so within that, I will hand him off for what I drafted him with, or not what Pace drafted him with. But for a 4, I don't know. I mean, that's not a top 100 pick, Bill. Like, that's somebody you're hoping is a role player most of the time. I'm perfectly okay saying, okay, Dave, because I'm okay at this stage extending Montgomery. Like, if it gets there and the money's right, which it should be, he's like a career sub 4 yards per carry back. I would struggle to think he doesn't know what he is at this point in his career. I think that you could agree with something, but I also think, Bill, that there's an aspect of negotiating where you got to set that price at that third
Sure.
rounder so that you can wait until, what is it, like 355, and suddenly the Bills say, fine, like,
Yeah.
we want to go win a ship, like, I'll give it
Yep.
to you.
Yep.
And then they're muttering to themselves, it's going to basically be a 4th rounder anyways. What's the last pick of the 3rd round mean to us? And so, like, you catch him on that championship high and you keep going, but we'll have to see. Either way, I'm about ready to roll.
Yep.
Talk
Get
to you
out
later,
there and
Bill.
trick or treat.
You bet. See ya.
See ya.